And we are live. This is Beatppl Podcast, episode 69. Interview with an innovator. Roger Linn joins us today. And if you watch the show, you probably know who Roger Linn is. If you've ever used any kind of drum machine or anything, or you dig MPCs, you probably know who Roger Linn is. He's the creator of the Linnstrom, the MPC, and the Linnstrom, and we have him on the show today. And it's a great honor to have him here. So, hey, Roger Linn, welcome to the show.
Hi, Corey, and hi, everybody. And I'm pleased to be here.
Yeah. So,
hey guys, just to cut everybody off right now, I'm hearing
like
squeal
some
from
humming.
somebody.
Yeah, it's like some humming.
I don't know who that is. I muted myself, so I know it's not me. Steele and Corey, you want to try that? It's still there.
So I'm muted.
I think it's Rod.
Is it an instrument playing?
There's no sound coming here.
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh yeah, it's Roger. That's fine. You know, we're
good.
We'll live with it.
So, Ken, I can't hear you. What's up?
Oh, my bad. I was saying, yeah, it's Roger, and I don't know if you got feedback going on or an instrument that's being leaned on or something, but we're getting like a high-pitched squeal.
Well, it's. I'm not hearing here.
Yeah,
it's
gone. Yeah, it's gone. Yep.
Cool.
Okay.
All right, so we're good now.
So,
Okay.
we got people in the chat, and they'll be chiming in. We'll be throwing them up here from time to time. And one person says, "Thanks for the MPC." How often do you hear that in your everyday life? How often do you hear that?
But it's very nice. I'm in a great position, and I do get a lot of compliments from people who write into my support email, and it feels great. The reason I do this is to influence music more than I could as a feeble musician. So when people who have more talent than I tell me that I made something that inspires them to make better music, it feels great. I never tire of it. It's great. I love it.
So I have two major questions. One question I'm going to save till later, but let me get this first one out the way. When you thought of the 16 pad layout, what were you thinking? Were you thinking musically, or were you thinking just from a drum aspect?
Well, it's interesting because the first instrument that I made with touch-sensitive pads was from my first company. It was called the Linn 9000, and I had a 8x3 matrix. In other words, 6x3. So it was 3 rows of 6 pads each, because it felt like since your hands are next to each other, it should be wider than it is taller or deeper. But then I made another version of the same product that I called the Linnstrom MIDI Studio, which actually was ill-fated. It was never released because my company went out of business before it was released. And for that, I wanted to standardize on the rack mount width. So the idea was to have pads on the left and other controls on the right. And for that, there just wasn't enough space to put the 8x3. And I thought 4x4 would do the trick, because when you're using two hands, you tend to use them close together anyway. And so that was actually the first case where I had the 4x4 matrix, which was then used for the MPC when I started working with Akai.
Are there any Linnstrom MIDI studios out in the wild?
There is a small business in Studio City, California, a suburb of Los Angeles, called Forat Electronics, F-O-R-A-T. And Bruce and Ben Forat were two of my employees, and they're real smart. It's mostly just Bruce now. I don't think Ben is involved in Forat Electronics anymore. But it's been great for me because Bruce has carried on repairs and modifications for the old Linn products. I forgot the question.
Oh no, I just Googled the Linnstrom MIDI Studio, and it looks like an
Oh, you said yeah.
Yeah, it has the MPC style pad layout.
Yeah, I've got one in my garage, and I think Bruce has got parts for. There were a total of around 5 of them or 6 of them made just in prototypes. So he's probably got a few of them there, but they're not working. I don't think the software works on them, so there's nothing you can do. It's a big boat anchor, basically.
Wow.
Yeah, but that kind of stuff is like collector's item boat anchor of joy.
Yeah.
Here's an interesting thing. I'm gonna put this. Hold on. I'm gonna put this up so you can see this. Open image in new tab. Where is it? Oh, it's too small though. But it's interesting. Somebody compared the layout of the Linnstrom MIDI Studio to the layout of the MPC Live. It's uncanny, quite frankly. Hold on, here it is.
I haven't seen is the MPC Live, is that the one that's on an iPad?
It sort of looks similar. I'll put it up here.
I think that may have been the MPC Fly.
Oh, I see.
MPC Fly.
Yeah, that was the MPC Fly. But yeah, so this is the MPC Live. But you know what I want to, so that the Linnstrom, that has a different pad layout. And when did this come out? When did the Linnstrom?
That was in 1982.
Okay. And I know there was like luminaries of pop music and just general music that like made this their primary instrument. Like, I mean, Prince and Sheila E. lived on the Linnstrom, and maybe the Linn 9000 too.
Well, actually, interestingly enough, Prince never used the Linnstrom. He used the precursor, which was called the LM1 drum computer.
Oh,
and as did Quincy Jones for the Michael Jackson records, and a number of other artists, because that was the first one that came.
Gabriel was on it too. Yeah.
Yes. There's a video I saw on the web of Peter Gabriel using a Linnstrom, but the first one was the LM1, and only 500 of those were made, but they were all in the right hands, and that came out in it was announced in 1979, but then shipped in early 1980.
Wow.
Okay. So let's
and Prince liked that one a lot better because you had individual tuning knobs on the back for each sound.
A quick question before we move off of artists like that. When was the first time you created a product and then you had it get into an artist's hand that you were impressed with, and you were just like, oh wow, like this artist is using my stuff and this is really cool?
One thing that really felt great was when I first showed it to Stevie Wonder. And because he was always one of my heroes, and so
I was just gonna say he didn't really see it, but that's just
yeah, exactly.
That's up for debate these days.
Yeah, that's actually up for debate. Yeah, that's up for debate.
But anyway, it's kind of an interesting story. I had an early prototype of my drum machine that didn't have sampled sounds, only had it was a computer I had of the day. And it was hooked up to a sound generator board from a Roland drum machine. And so I took it over to Stevie Wonder's studio, and he was very impressed with it. But the trouble is it required to have a screen, the computer screen, and allowed you to, move the cursor over and hit the space bar to play, or hit a number to plug in a star that would mean it was basically step time programming. But watching Stevie Wonder try to use this, made me realize that it was a stupid design. It didn't make any sense because musicians don't need to use step time, and it's a unnecessarily translation step. If I want to play a beat, I can do to try to convert that into switches in time is an unnecessary conversion step if you've already got the talent to play it.
Yeah.
So when Stevie Wonder was using this, I just saw that it was taking him a long time to do it. And so I basically went back to the drawing board and decided to make something that was real time. And then it worked out well because I came up with the ideas of quantization, swing, and loop recording. So, and those together, you put those things together, and it made it much easier to create beats. And there's some merit in step recording, and I had step recording in my products, but it seems like the people who bought the Roland 808 type style things with the step recording, that was better if you didn't really have the ability to play, the musical talent to play. But the guys who bought my machines tended to have, in my view anyway, more musical talent, so they could actually play what they wanted to hear, and then the machine would do things like subtly correcting timing errors. You could adjust the swing, but they could play it.
Was it the 60 that had the step recording where you can do the steps while the sequencer wasn't running, where you could just input the steps while it wasn't running?
Yeah, it would do step recording. There was a thing that I always used to use in early sequencers back in the 70s was that idea that you have a sequencer, and every time you play in a note, it records it into the next 16th note. So if I play dun 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 dun, dun and you could play it.
Oh yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And I had used that trick a lot, and in fact, I had written code for an early sequencer based on the same computer I had that I used for the original drum machine prototype, and I used it on some recordings back in the day for the band Toto, for Leon Russell, who was an artist I used to work with as a guitar player, and so I wanted to put that. I thought that was a great boon for being able to create very impressive sounding sequences with very little effort, because just every time you hit the key, it puts it into the next step note, 16th note. You know.
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah, that's a great feature, man. That's something that I see a lot of DAWs use that feature. Like the other day, I was writing something in Studio One, and it has that input step record feature where I can play notes on the keyboard in sequence, not running the sequencer, and it's recording it in 16th notes. And I was like, that came from the MPC60. Like that.
Well, no, I can't take credit for that.
Oh, okay. Where'd that come?
Actually,
Yeah, where'd that come from?
It was actually a fairly common feature in early step sequencers.
Oh, really?
The first sequencer I ever used was a part of a modular synthesizer from the EMU company, and this was back in around 1974, I think, and it had a module called the step sequencer, and it had a little readout and 3 little digits, and then you would just it had a gate input that you connect to your analog gate and voltage keyboard, and every time you hit the note, it would advance the sequencer by 1 step. And funny story about this is that the guys who founded EMU, a guy named Dave Rossum and a guy named Scott Wedge, they had little nerdy jokes in their manual, and their step sequencer had a display in octal, in other words, base 8. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 20, 21, 20. It would not display the digits 8 or 9. And the reason is because it was much easier using the digital chips of the day to display it in base 8, which made it confusing for human beings, but it made it much easier to implement. And actually it worked pretty well for doing 16th note or normal 4/4 time recordings. But in their catalog sheet for this step sequencer, they had the picture display the octal equivalent of 69, and that was a sort of nerdy little sex joke.
Well, hey Roger, just so you know, be very careful about what you say, because Dave is coming on next week. So.
Oh man, Dave is actually.
He will bicycle to your house and beat you up. So.
Dave and I are very good friends, and Dave is, I think, who I think is the most talented music product engineer in the world. He's just phenomenal. The guy is so deep and so smart.
I totally agree.
He's just amazing.
I have a question. I have a question in regards to all of that.
Wait, Ken, let him ask a question.
Let me say one more thing first, though. Another thing in their catalog for the EMU modular synthesizer, for their noise module, they had specifications, and one of the specifications was excellent noise to signal ratio.
Anyway, that's the way to do it. That's the way to do it. So I have a question about the fact that you had used samples in early drum machines, and what were some of the challenges of that? How were you, like, what were some of the things that you had to overcome in order to fit samples into such small spaces back then, and to make the latency work and that sort of thing for you?
Oh yeah, it was difficult because at the time, because of cost, I was using PROMs, programmable read-only memories, that were limited to only 2,000 bytes or 2K bytes because it's just so expensive otherwise. So I had a bunch of these things in there, and so, for example, the kick drum I think was only 2K bytes long at 27 kilohertz sampling rate, and the samples were 8-bit in a format called companding. It was used by the phone company for telephone transmissions. And so even with all that, the first LM1 drum machine cost $5,000. And so it was difficult. And I had no cymbals. All I had was hi-hat. And the hi-hat was too long to record an entire open hi-hat. So what I did instead is I took mallets, or my friend Art Wood, who created all the samples for the other drum machine, he just used mallets on a hi-hat that was slightly open to create a sustained hi-hat sound. And so that sound was looping inside, and I would just use an envelope generator to pick off a little bit of that. And the hi-hat decay control would control how long it would decay after you strike it.
Oh, snap.
Nice.
Wow. Okay. I have a weird question. This is a nerdy drum question. Do you know what drum set Art Wood used to make the samples in the Linnstrom?
It's funny. It's Daniel. Are you a drummer?
Yes.
Yes, he is.
Okay. It's funny because no one's ever asked that, but just yesterday, an old friend of mine named Jimmy Braylauer, who was a session drummer in New York in the 80s, asked me that question, and I forwarded it over to Art. So if Art answers, he'll get back to me, and I'll send you the answer.
Oh
I
my
don't
gosh!
know.
I would now, if I find out, I'm gonna hunt that thing down and just have it. Oh my gosh!
That's a dope bit of
Well,
information.
speaking on that same topic, kind of.
Wait a minute, can I do a corollary to that?
Always.
There was a funny story. Is Bruce Springsteen's drummer?
Never heard of him.
Max Weinberg.
Yeah.
They were doing stadiums during the 80s because he was so popular, and they found that if they would mic the snare drum, it would just sound like cardboard. It wasn't full, and so he had a Linnstrom, and it had 5 trigger inputs in the back. And so he would just have a contact mic connected to his snare drum that would go into the trigger input of the Linnstrom and play that big snare drum.
Oh,
and
man, that makes a lot of sense.
And so, but the funny thing about it it was not dynamic. It was all one level.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to see, and Max Weinberg invited me to come down and see one of the Springsteen shows, which was in some huge stadium. And it was so funny because every song, the entire time through, it was that same sample of Art Wood hitting the snare drum once. But the sessions for recording were really funny. I had a home studio in one room in my house, and Art would come over, and I'd stick him in the closet, and he'd tune up his drum, and everything's ready. And I'd say, "You ready? Okay, we're live. Record." And he'd hit it once. I said, "Thank you very much, Art."
Here's your $1.
That's classic.
So
man,
about that
crazy.
sort of thing, with all the resurgence of certain companies trying to do reissues of things and that sort of thing, what about copyright on these old drum machines? Do you still hold that? Who holds the copyright to all those old samples? Because you see them everywhere, and I know they're not always being paid for properly. So I wonder about that.
I don't know. I never really liked copyrights. I have sort of a love-hate relationship with intellectual property law because I want to have my ideas protected, but I also want ideas to proliferate into the society so people can make better instruments and better music. So my understanding of it, and I don't understand this stuff well, is that there's a gray area regarding the recording of samples because they're so short that doesn't mean a whole lot. And whenever I start to read about this stuff, copyright and legal issues, I generally just fall asleep. So
Sure.
it's you have to focus on what you like to do, and so there are not a lot of copies out there on the web, and I don't know. It doesn't really.
Well,
bother me.
it kind of comes to mind for a few different reasons, because there's also the semi-viral video for us beat producer nerds of you talking about the situation with Jack, and I don't think we need to completely rehash all of that, and we can get a little bit into some of that stuff later. But the reason why I bring it up is because it, like you said, as a creator, as a musician, you want ideas to proliferate and people to create, but at the same time you do want to be respected at the same time, both monetarily and otherwise. So it makes me wonder about that sort of thing, because there's been rumors about remakes and clones and that sort of thing, and it makes me say, if you're going to do that and you're talking about a digital based drum machine, How does Roger Linn feel about that?
Well, I think for samples, I don't really care about it that much. I think that those samples are popular, not necessarily because of what I did, but because of the music that people created with them. It was such a new idea that a lot of very creative people, most notably Prince, brought the true beauty out of the machine. He put the soul in the machine, and the early artists that did it. And so, I think a lot of people, fortunate for me, they credit me. They say, "Oh, that sound was wonderful." No, I would say, no, that sound, the recordings that Prince made or that early adopters made are the true wonderful things, and you're associating that beauty with the sound when it really has to do with the music that was created by it. And so I don't really see so much music magic in a particular sample. And I guess, not that I'm inviting everybody to copy them like crazy, but everyone already has anyway.
Yeah, right.
Sure.
Exactly.
Linnstrom are all over the web, so it doesn't really matter so much.
And
I'd say it's a compliment.
You kind of keep trying to move forward is the other aspect of it that I keep looking at is you are a UI kind of king. So if Dave Rossum is out there building these amazing chips and Dave Smith and others are utilizing these these fundamentals in really interesting ways, if there's one thing that when I talk to people about Roger Linn, I'm like the UI, because if it wasn't for you, we probably wouldn't have that 16 pad layout. We wouldn't, And when I look at something like the Tempest even, which I have an extreme love-hate relationship with, but it's UI-wise, it's so much fun to create on live.
I need a Tempest.
I'd like to hear a little bit about your thoughts on just creating user interfaces in general, because you seem to kind of continually push barriers and win with that.
Well, I would like to add on to that. Before you answer, I want you to answer that. But I think that's it's a good example of it when you say, you took the machine to Stevie Wonder and he was working on it with step sequencer, but then you looked at that and you totally went back and said, I need to make this a better piece for people to jump in and use the interface to program music the way musicians program music. And I wonder if that goes into the question that Ken is asking, how you being the UI king and how you approach UI design, where that kind of lies and how you approach it that way.
Yeah, UI is very important for me, and mostly because I've been so angry, as in my early musician days, when I buy a product and it was just horrible to operate. And the trouble with it is there's two different headspaces. One is you're making music. The other one is you're reading manuals and all that crap. And it gets to a point where you associate the pain of having to deal with the technical stuff with the music. And you don't want that. You want to be able, when you have an idea, you want to be able to go into your recording setup and just make the music. And so what I've tried to do is try to make the UI as simple as I can and focus on the things that people really want to do to make music. And what I see today, I think is bothersome. I see a lot of products where people are just doing more and better. And they're saying, for example, in synthesizers, there's this trend now to make synthesizers that have 80 oscillators and 13 filters and 27 envelopes and 50 LFOs. And on all the presets on these, you couldn't play a melody if your life depended on it. It's more like you press a key and it goes.
That's right. Yeah.
That's what I'm known for.
Yeah, sounds like a really messed up mod matrix.
That's my signature sound, so stop talking trash on it.
But,
I agree with that.
But what I try to do, part of it too, it comes from my experience as a musician, and I'm impatient. If I want to make music, I want to make music.
Yes.
So instead of giving people tons of options, I try to set it by default to what I think that really helps them as musicians as possible. And also I think I'm trying to target generally people who have some musical talent. It's less for people who just want to experiment and noodle around with music, more for people that have some musical talent. So, for example, the idea of real-time programming. The assumption is you've got talent. I'm not saying here's a machine that this for someone who doesn't have talent but wants to sound like someone that does. I'm saying this is a machine. It's like making a violin or making a guitar. You've got talent. That's your department. I'm just going to make something for talented people to make better music. That's all.
Very good. Yep.
And just as a corollary to that, making the UI is actually the most fun for me. I start off in Adobe Illustrator, and I decide what controls I want, the things that I'm really going to use all the time, and how can I best place those so they're easily used. And then what I do is, once I have that arrangement right, I put everything into my 3D program, which is a program called Rhino 3D. And I actually make the whole product up, and I put the controls on there and make it three-dimensional, and then do renderings of it. And I just have it on the screen there, and I play with it with my fingers, even though it doesn't do anything at that point. And I experiment, and I say, how is this going to work? And I'm what people would call a top-down designer. You know, some people start with an electronic circuit, and then they move outward, and the last thing they do is put a user interface on it. And where I tend to do is I tend to say, what does the musician need first? Or what would I like to have first? And then just make the guts, drill down and make the guts.
Well, one of the things where you can see that, and I got to try to find the link. It's probably on your website, which people should probably check out, rogerlinndesign.com. I'm trying to find it. You're really open about a lot of your design ideas and your method about going about things. And I'm sure that in a way that's a really fun thing to do, but I'm sure it can be aggravating because then people are constantly bugging you, like myself, who's going to bring up Boomchick, right? So the original Tempest idea, before it was Tempest, was Boomchick, and then it split into two. And there was like a Boomchick analog and a Boomchick digital. But you were constantly posting up revisions of the UI and 3D renders of like just ideas that you were fleshing out. And like you don't really see that very often. Especially back then.
It's number one, I think you need to have an iterative process because you get feedback from people and all that. But the other thing too, it's really fun for me to make these 3D renderings and move things around. And Boomchick was that was a funny name I came up with. It was really more of a working title, but it's but after that, when we made it, we called it Linnstrom 2. I think that was what it was. Dave and I identified that his market really was more analog synthesis because that's what he's good at, and I don't care as much about that. I've never made an analog product in my life, except for the Tempest with Dave. And so, and the MPC had no analog in it. It was all digital. So we figured the best thing to do is to take two paths and have one with all this analog circuitry in it and then one just digital. And then what happened was eventually it just focused down onto Tempest as a analog machine with some samples, but it's not like an MPC type machine. And then I went on my own and go make a drum machine. And I'm still working on it. It's just that I take forever to make products because I'm basically a one-person company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's one thing that every time I've seen you in person, like I always walk up and I ask about it because I'm just like, oh, so about that because I remember you talking about it like years ago, and these one thing that I try to stress on a lot of people is that sequencers especially are probably one of the hardest things to build. Like in general,
you actually say that a lot.
I do because I've been involved in quite a few sequencers being built, and I realize like you have to think about so much, everything from resolution and PPQ to how swing is going to work to how you're going to divide up things, how you're going to address things on the chip, how many cycles you're going to get. Like there's a lot that goes involved in these things, and then from a top-down view, like you're saying, you want to say, okay, well, what's the actual scope of the project and how you're going to handle that. The Tempest, it's pretty obvious right from the gate that you wanted it to be a live instrument. Like you wanted it to be something that you could perform on and not stop. It differs quite a bit from the MPC in the fact that the MPC was very much you could do live programming on it for sure. And I love the MPC for that. But the Tempest feels more like, hey, don't stop. Just keep going.
Yeah, that's true. I think what we're all trying to do and have been doing since about 1970 or earlier, actually, is answer the question, how do computers fit into music? And so, there are many ways to do that. And I think it's easy to go a little bit too far, at least in my view. And all views are legitimate, but in my view, it's easy to say, I'll just have the computer do everything, or almost everything. For example, I'll never practice to develop any technique. I'll just program an expressive solo over a few months and get it perfect in every little thing about it. But what I noticed is that there was, when I was a teenager, I played music. I played guitar, and I would get together with people. It was social. There was practice. You develop skills. You develop gestures. And I noticed this slow morphing into a music making process where one person sits in a dark room rolling a bar of soap in front of a TV screen to make music. And it seemed that there was not only
that sounds awesome.
there was it seemed like it was swinging too far in that direction. I remember seeing Peter Gabriel in concert once, and before the band came out, there were laptops at every station. I thought, what is everybody going to do? Emails? It just didn't seem.
Just
to finish the thought. So what I'm saying is, I'm trying to find a happy medium between the computer and human potential. To say there are certain things that humans can do that machines can't do, and there's certain things that machines can do that humans can't do. But let's not give up on humans yet. Let's have some expression in there too. And I think there's tremendous merit in the ability to develop gestures, whether it's a guitar player doing a wonderful bend and vibratos, or a violinist with a vibrato, or a sax player with his embouchure, or some of the amazing guys who I've seen perform on an MPC and doing things that are uniquely human. And you look at some of these videos and you say, this is something that only a few human beings can do. This is special. We will call this person an artist because only a few people can be an artist. If everybody can do it by pressing a button, then no one's an artist. Everybody's got the same skills. And so I'm trying to develop that and use the computer and the computer's technologies where they have benefit in augmenting innate human talent. And one thing that's interesting about this, if you look at how computers have been integrated into all other aspects of our lives, they are used for well-defined tasks that can be repeated over and over again. Well, in music, it's looping.
Right.
Roger, I wanted to ask you a question. You mentioned being a guitar player, and that's one of the things the Linnstrom has kind of stood out for me personally. I've always looked at the Linnstrom and thought, man, because I play guitar. I'm not a keyboard player. We got D Steele here. He's a prolific keyboard player, and for me to bring my expression to MIDI instruments, the Linnstrom has always been something I've looked at and thought, man, that would be the perfect way to bridge my guitar playing into the MIDI world. Is that was that your intention with the Linnstrom?
Well, no, it's interesting. The reason I chose first of all, for those of you who don't know, Linnstrom it's this thing. It's basically like a bunch of drum pads that are about 3/4 inch square. But what they're used for, and let me get a different sound up here, is to sense 3 dimensions of your fingers polyphonically. So you can do things like vibratos, and I'll just do a quick example of that. Let's see here. We talked about guitar, so. Here, this is maybe
that sounds awesome. Already so expressive.
Man.
And so the way the notes that are laid out is each one of these rows is kind of like a string. Let me see from down here. From here, let's say.
So is it laid out like a guitar? Is it laid out like a guitar? Okay.
Yeah.
It's laid out like a stringed instrument, and you can tune the strings, the rows, however you like. Then what these lights do is they just tell you where the white keys are. So the blue is C, D,
right, yep,
E, F.
So right now you're in C major.
Yeah, well, yes, exactly. That's the normal light pattern. And so that allows you to, and then the different rows are just like different strings, and they're normally tuned all in fourths. Oh, I'm pressing a button. There we go. So if I want to play a melody, for example, there we go.
Wow. Wow.
That's dope.
Now, there was other.
You just took money out of Bryce's wallet, by the way.
Yes, you did.
So there
Yes,
were
you
other
did.
products. So before the Linnstrom came out, there was a couple other products that were doing sort of griddish things. Like there was a Soundplane from Madrona, and there was I'm trying to remember the other one. There was a harmonic layout that was similar to
The
Eigenharp.
yeah.
There was a harmonic layout one that's similar to like a accordion, right?
Well, there are a few of those, but this is where, and the most important one was the Continuum by Little Hawkman, which came out in 1999.
Absolutely.
And what that has is just basically one long array of notes on sort of a mouse pad like surface or neoprene, and then the pitches are equally spaced, and you see where the black and white keys would be on a piano, but it's a continuous surface, a continuum, and that thing is really to this day still is excellent. And Little Hawkman is a genius, and he was actually gave a paper on this in 1986, so he was well above any of us.
Wow.
And I just basically said, well, instead of just one long row of notes across, I'll have overlapping rows of notes in pitch, and that way you can do chords this way instead of, for example, C in one row.
Yeah.
And they're all just different ways of doing it.
I remember, because I followed the project, because I'm a uber fan, so I followed the project very closely, and I remember you researching the sensor design and everything. You really put it all out there. I mean, you were really showing us all your process very early on, from how you were getting the sensitivity. You were, I think you had invested in a company or something at some point, or some technology or something to that effect. And I'm trying to remember way back, because this project's been underway for quite a while now. But I'm remembering this stuff way back, which I can remember better than my kids' birth dates, which is absurd.
Wow, Ken, you gotta get your priorities.
Well, honestly, I had, and not to upset Roger, but I did have an MPC in the hospital when my daughter was born with me. It wasn't a Roger Linn MPC, but it was an MPC. So,
well, hold on. Actually, I wanna right there. There's two things I actually want to ask. So when you started doing the Linnstrom and about the expressivity, there wasn't a lot out there like that, but now we have quite a few instruments that are kind of going down that path. And I think to tie it into something you said, hey, obviously I created this thing or that thing, and there's intellectual property there, but also I want to be able to have those ideas proliferate into electronic instruments and the innovation of electronic instruments so that, we all win. So what do you think about how that sector of the market has kind of boomed over the years since you've introduced the Linnstrom? You have a lot of MPE is a standard now in the MIDI 2.0 and all of that. What do you think?
Well, actually, to be fair to some of those others we mentioned, I was the fifth entry into the market. The Continuum was first. Eigenharp came out after that. Soundplane, it was out of that, and the Roland keyboard actually came out before I released Linnstrom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That was before you released it, but you have been working on it for quite a while and kind of sharing ideas as you went along, though, right?
I think the Soundplane was also closest to that grid layout, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and Randy Jones, who made that, is a good friend, and in fact, we're all very good friends. We had these wonderful dinners at the NAMM show together. Because these are people that, it's hard to find people that share the same passion for this sort of expressive control. And the way we all feel is that any sale to any one of us raises the tide and floats all boats higher.
There you go.
And for example, the Roland keyboard, he's gotten something like $75 million in investment. And so he's really done a great job for all of us on educating the public about the merits of expressive touch control.
Yeah.
Mm.
I have
And I love to say to people, someone says, "Do you have any competition?" Because I'm basically working from one room in my house, this room, and with subcontracted manufacturing and order fulfillment. But otherwise, I'm the whole company. And if you call up support, you get me. So I like to joke about the fact that my company has no investment, no employees, and I work from home, no building even. And Rolly has, at one point, they had like 120 employees and $75 million in investment.
wow.
Yeah.
Now, of course, they sold more.
So let me jump in here and ask my second huge question.
Hold on, Roger's frozen. Let's make sure he's there.
Roger, you there?
Yeah, he's frozen.
Uh-oh.
Oh,
Oh, there you go.
Rolly just
Okay.
paid to have your stream frozen. Just
So Roger, as a huge fan, I love everything you do. There's been crazy rumors out there that you're working on another drum machine. Is it true? And
What is it?
Yeah, what is it? Oh
Oh,
yeah.
you know, it's no secret. I've been working on it. I've announced it a number of times. People ask me about it. I said, sure, I'm working on it. And in fact, I've been working on it ever since.
that's that Boomchick Linnstrom too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ever since Linnstrom 2 was bifurcated into a product for Dave's mark and one for mine, it's just that I at that point I decided I would go to Linnstrom first because it was more interesting to me.
Absolutely.
But now, what I'm doing, sure, I can tell you in general terms what Linnstrom 2 is about. And that's still the title, and I may change it, who knows. But the idea of it is that it takes the expressive, the real-time operation, the performance-oriented operation of Tempest, that sort of a thing, but with the expressive control over sample-based sounds, but the expressive control you find in Linnstrom. And
Wow.
there's, I can demo this a little bit if I can get this. For some
Whoa.
reason.
Is this a world exclusive right here?
Oh no, I've done this before.
Oh.
Yeah, you're not that
No,
good.
just tell us.
I was about to do the mixtape overdubs. Like,
Hey, yo, while Roger gets that set up, yo, Ken, I gotta tell you, man, you banging on your keyboard with a hammer and a spring.
Oh,
Yes. I feel like
I keep
I feel
trying
like
to
he's
move
got
it off of there.
elephants.
My bad.
Elephants over there. Elephants like walking on
bad.
his keyboard.
Yeah, you know what? I'm literally gonna buy a whole new mic stand like today because of that. That's my fault.
Oh, good. Okay, I'm going to Roger.
Okay, here's let me elevate this for something. Hang on a second.
Yep.
Here.
So let me get this straight. Is he saying that the Linnstrom 2 is going to have the expressiveness of Linnstrom? Is that what we?
Three-dimensional control.
Yes, he is.
That's beautiful.
So if you can see this here, well, probably not so easy, but I'll try for it. Anyway, on the surface here, you always know the feature on MPC I call note repeat that I first introduced on the product called Linn 9000 in 1984. And so this is kind of like note repeat on steroids. So I can now, by varying pressure, I can get on this hi-hat sound varying strikes of velocity, right? Unfortunately, there's, I think, Logic did an update.
Oh yeah.
Oh, here we go. Okay, so I can. I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to make an adjustment here because something's funny in this file.
hold on, let me put my
let me
wallet
figure it out.
on the other side of the
Yeah.
room real quick.
Yeah. Is there?
Oh, that's
Oh,
wild.
wow.
That is wild.
Man.
Okay, so yeah, right now I've got this is just doing it's like note repeat on steroids because they're 3 dimensions. So
What?
as I,
Whoa.
Man.
see, the trouble is this should be.
Man.
It shouldn't be so resonant.
My
I'm gonna
wife
see
is
if I can
gonna
get this
leave
down.
me.
Whoa.
Whoa.
So what I'm doing is,
And that's
the way it
one
should be
hi-hat?
working if I listen.
That's
The way
one
it should be
hi-hat?
working if this is just one hi-hat out of 200
Man.
pads. Now with my thumb, I can change that rate.
Yeah. Oh man, yeah.
And then I can change pitch.
That's brilliant.
And if this is working right, I get a natural sound towards the back of the pad and or to the front of the pad, and a more pressure controlled filter on the front of the pad. And there's a video on my site that demonstrates this. So here's for snare drum.
What?
So
I see Steele's mind blowing right now.
Oh my gosh.
So by varying pressure on these three pads, you can do beats live with three fingers.
No, don't tell me that. Oh man.
Man, that's crazy. That is crazy.
So, one of the things about the Linnstrom that comes to mind is
God.
the whole MPE movement and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I work with ASM, which makes the Hydrasynth, and they do polyphonic aftertouch and just recently started supporting MPE as well. And one of the things that I've discovered is, hold on, back up a little bit, Roger. I noticed that we get feedback when you lean in. So I'm trying to troubleshoot. I'm trying to troubleshoot while we're on the air.
I think what it is, I have my hearing aids in my pocket.
Oh.
I'll take them out.
That's absurd because people were commenting in the feed. They were like, "It sounds like hearing aid feedback," and I was like, "Oh, it's iPods." So whoever was saying that in the chat, you guys win. Yeah. The MPE standard as a whole, though, it seems like it's kind of implemented a little bit shifty between different brands and whatnot. It doesn't feel like it's 100% locked down across everybody and always done the same way. Like the basics are there, but it doesn't always feel like it's done the same way. How do you, because you were one of the early adopters of that kind of platform. How do you feel about all that and the movement of MPE and MIDI 2.0, which is kind of coming about?
Well, it's MPE that started out with a conversation with me and Roland LM, who makes the Seaboard. And we're saying, hey, we're all trying to get this polyphonic expression. Why don't we all do it the same way? And so then we enlisted people from Moog and Apple and a few other companies. We tried to come up with a good standard. And it turns out that the standard actually, funny enough, already existed. Since 1984 in MIDI 1.0, it was called MIDI Mode 4. And all it said was that instead of using the different MIDI channels for different instruments, you'd use them for different touches or different strings on a guitar synthesizer, which people were doing in that time around 1984. And so there really was no need for MPE, but we did.
It's about bringing the knowledge to the front, kind of thing, right?
Well, and part of it was there's a one little thing you can add in there if you call it an MPE instead of MIDI Mode 4, but but Roland did anyway in our discussions. Roland Lab, he said, well, I think it's important, and he made a good point that we get the sanction of the MIDI Association. And I said, Roland, I don't think we should do that because it'll be 3 years before they do this. And Roland said, no, I talked to the guy at the MMA, the MIDI Manufacturers Association. He says it'll be a few months. And I said, okay, let's do it. It was 4 years later that it was introduced.
Oh,
Wow.
And that was great for Roland because he had his own synth, but a lot of synth makers were waiting until the standard was adopted, until they added MPE. So it was kind of difficult for me, but it all worked. People were able to do it because they were multi-timbral synths, which do the same thing as MPE. And then a lot of people were just putting in MPE because they got tired of waiting for the MMA. So it's okay. It all works out. But, the most important thing is that it's a good standard that anyone can say, here's an MPE synth, and I can play it, whether it's with a Seaboard or the Linnstrom or a Continuum or whatever.
Can I just say thank you for the adrenaline pedal?
Oh, you're very welcome.
So when I was in college, I was using a cracked version of a plugin of the adrenaline plugin, and it was literally like the plugin that I would use on everything because it was such a diverse. And then I actually learned about the plug-in first, and then I learned about the pedal second. And I was like, whoa, wait, this comes from a real thing? And then a homie Jordy sent me a picture of him using the adrenaline pedal, and I'm like, man, I got to get one of those things because it's one of the most diverse pedals that I've seen out there, like for processing sounds. It's really
It's an interesting story, a brief story. Adrenaline came out of when I used to work with this artist, Leon Russell, and I had convinced him to buy a $20,000 modular EMU synthesizer.
As everyone should.
Yeah. Hey, I just convinced you. Yeah, I just convinced him to,
As everyone should.
It was a great gig. I was 19, and Leon had money, and I knew about synths. So whenever there was something cool on the market, I would just convince him he needed to buy it.
That's right.
And so anyway,
I don't even have money, and I want to buy it. So.
But anyway, what we used to do, both Leon and me together, work in the studio on his albums and on my music on the side. I would work late at night on the studio and my stuff. But we would use sequencers and filters and these different synthesizer modules to process acoustic instrument recordings, like guitar sounds and all that. And one of the fun things we would do is we would take, like, someone's playing a drum beat, and whenever there was a transient in the drum beat, it would step the sequencer or a random noise generator to a new level. So, for example, someone would be playing a hand drum, and the hand drum would then create successive new resonant filter frequencies of a guitar every time the hand drum is hit. And it was a very cool thing. And so I thought, this is great, except it takes a modular synthesizer and a whole lot of knowledge to do it. And I would like guitar players to be able to do this. So I thought, why don't I put it in just a simple pedal? And that was the idea behind it. So Adrenaline is basically a big modular synthesizer, but with presets where you turn a preset and you can change everything at once.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have sequences of filter tones. Yeah, there it is in the site.
So it's so cool.
It's a fun product, and it's very inspirational. And there's this blues guitarist named John Mayer who used it in a few of his hits. When
Nobody knows
in
him.
his career. Yeah, not so much anymore, but he had a lot of hits. At any rate, it was, but it was very creative to see how he would use it, and he did some interesting things with it.
I used to play pads into it and have it do all these gated sequences, just playing pads of my old chord trinity through this thing.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's so cool.
I got a question for you product wise, because you're kind of known as the drum machine guy, but with Roger Linn Designs, you being a guitar player, you're making these really interesting guitar pedals, and I've got friends of mine that swear by swear by this stuff. Did you feel like it was hard to get product awareness about this sort of thing?
Well, it's always as a tiny company, it's always hard to get noise, to break through the noise, and so to this day there are people that say, I just bought an instrument, I had no idea it existed, and I happened to come across this webpage that talked about this instrument, and so it just takes a long time. It's my sales are always sort of follow what's called an inverted bell curve. I get early adopters that know about what I'm doing, and they're waiting for it to come out of the gate. And then it tends to drop down a bit. And then as the word spreads around, people say, oh, this is really a quality musical instrument. I can make music. And they tell their friends, and then it starts to climb back up. So and that was the same thing in my early drum machine.
That must be hard to kind of plan for, though, as far as like when you're trying to ramp up production and that sort of thing. It must be hard for you to kind of like really gauge what the order structure is going to be, and all, especially being a one-person operation in that way.
It is. It's hard financially, especially because I have to plan for my production well in advance, and then if I don't get enough sales, then I got to pay for all the parts, and if I get too much sales, then I don't have anything to ship. But I have a secret weapon that really helps me, and this is something that I recommend to anyone starting a small business that makes electronic products. Marry a woman who works at Apple.
Oh, there it is.
There it is.
There it is.
Okay.
Secret weapon.
Wait, are you telling me that you're married to Siri?
Roger Linn and Siri, the new power couple.
I knew she was jacking my beats.
But But Apple pays very well. We actually only live about 7 minutes from Apple, and it's great. And in fact, she manages the entire department of what are called engineering project managers for the audio hardware department.
Wow.
But she won't tell me anything. They're so secretive. I try to.
It's like working for Area 51.
Oh, tell me about the new.
Well, let me go really far off of the normal topic real quick and just ask, like, where did you meet your wife at?
It's interesting. I was living in Berkeley until 2.5 years ago when we moved down closer to Apple because of my wife's job, and she had embarked on a second degree. She got her engineering degree. She's from Germany at the Technical University in Munich, and so she came over here to do her thesis project where she was writing software for a 48-channel convolution reverb that was used in the psychoacoustics department of Cal Berkeley. And it turns out one of the people on her team was Don Buchla's wife, who was a good friend of mine. Because Don Buchla lived in Don Buchla, the synth guy.
I never heard of him.
Yeah, I never heard of that.
So anyway, when my wife, who I didn't know at the time, first arrived in California, Don's wife, whose name is Nanique, she's a French woman, she invited Ingrid out on the town to go to a restaurant in Berkeley called Downtown, where they have live jazz. And I happened to be there too, and so I saw Don and Nanique, and they introduced me, and so anyway, the rest is history.
That's beautiful.
That's beautiful, yeah. Man. That's
the kind of stuff that I'm always interested in. I'm like, I want to know, like, what made these people, you know?
Yeah, the person behind the technology and the innovation is always good.
That's beautiful.
Well, yeah, and it's also fascinating for me too. And so, when I was up in Berkeley, I had this little coffee group that we meet once a week that we call the Dead Presidents Society. It was originally because it was Tom and me and Dave Smith, Tom Overheim and me and Dave Smith, and we were all former presidents of companies that have died. So it seemed like a fitting title.
I remember seeing pictures of you guys out at like breakfast and whatnot together.
Yeah. And it was really good because particularly working at home, it can get very boring and lonely. And so it's nice to have that sort of social network. And now down here, I'm in a town called Los Altos in Silicon Valley. And there are a lot of very creative people. So I have another lunch group that we're now doing via Zoom. And it's Evan Brooks, who is the co-founder of DigiDesign. It's Pat Scandalis, who is one of the makers of the GeoShred app that's made by Moforti.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant inventor named Tim Thompson, who, he cashed out and made a lot of money in tech years ago. And he makes these beautiful instruments, including one called the Space Palette that he shows at Burning Man every year.
I don't think I know that one.
And it's this wonderful visual thing, instrument, and a bunch of other very creative folks. Oh, James McCarthy, who wrote a music language called Super Collider.
Wow.
Audio music.
Yep.
And a few others. So it's really wonderful. And the ideas are flowing, and our lunch goes for 3 hours, and we never stop talking. And it's that sort of stuff that really is stimulating. I think we learn so much from each other. So it's a very nice environment.
I think that's one of the things that I count that to be very fortunate in that way, in that I have Corey Steele, I've got Upright here. Like, we all talk constantly, and we surround ourselves with like-minded creative individuals that, really forward our mindset and kind of keep us moving and pushing forward. And I think that's really important. And it's a beautiful idea that, you're not huddled in a corner like, I have these ideas, I'm going to keep them to myself. It's,
Absolutely.
Hey, let's share these ideas. Let's bounce everything off the wall. I've got people that aren't scared to think, in an open way, and let's see what comes of that.
Have you guys?
So that's a fundamental idea of academia, is that you publish. You publish and perish.
Yeah.
And so it's important. The idea is to spread those ideas. You got your teaching job. You do your research, and you might get something else from the university, but you publish. And then those ideas go out in the world. And there was a wonderful song in the 80s by a woman, a songwriter named Mary Chapin Carter, called "Ideas Are Like Stars; They Fall from the Sky."
Oh wow!
And the thing is, it's I think as musicians or creative people, we're all in love with ideas. And when you get an idea, it's you wake up in the middle of the night and it fascinates you. And I think that's beautiful. So I try to surround myself with as many people who love ideas as well, and we'll just get together and hyper ourselves into a frenzy.
And speaking of that, so I'd like to know, and it kind of spawns from the Dead Presidents group, and I don't know what came first, the Tempest or the Dead Presidents Society.
I was going to go the same route. So I'm
so how did that collaboration and that?
That's what I wanted to ask, man, because I want to know.
Well, it started actually with Tom Oberheim, and Tom, the synth guy, analog synth guy, and Tom lives close to Berkeley in an area called Orinda. And so Tom was, at one point, he was doing some hardware work for Cal Berkeley's engineering department. And so he would come over and he'd say, why don't we get together? And I said, that sounds great to me because I'm bored stiff working at home alone. So we would meet down at this coffee house. And then a few other people joined us. David Wessel, who's passed away now, but he was the head of CINMAT, the Center for New Music and Audio Technologies at Cal Berkeley, their computer music school. Max Matthews. I don't know if you know Max Matthews, but he's known as the father of computer music. And he created the first electronic music algorithms on early computers at Bell Labs in the 1950s. Wow. He would come over. And a great story about Max. If any of you remember the movie 2001 by Stanley Kubrick, there's a scene in it where Dave, the protagonist, is disassembling the HAL 9000 computer, and when he's doing this, the computer's sort of losing its marbles, and he starts to sing the song "Daisy, Daisy, WRN." Yeah, it's an old song called "A Bicycle Built for Two." Well, the reason that they use that is because Max Matthews created the first singing computer, and the song he chose was that song, Daisy.
Wow!
and so the idea of that scene in 2001 was by as HAL 9000 was losing his marbles, he was reverting to his childhood, his early experiences of singing that song.
Oh man, that is nuts. That's great.
that's wild.
Oh man.
And so Max was in our group, and Max was great. I gotta tell you a great story about Max. Really quick. Max has passed away now, but in the group, he was still, when he was quite elderly, come to the group. And one day, I think he was 84 at the time, and his hearing was getting bad, as my hearing is. And he had tried all the hearing aids, and all the hearing aid companies would give them hearing aids for free for him to test them because he was so famous. But he didn't like any of them. He said they sucked. They all sounded bad for music. So he decided to make one on his own, and we knew that he was doing this anyway. So we're all sitting at the Dead Presidents Society, or sitting in our group there in the coffee house in Berkeley. Mac walks in the door, and what he has on his head is a bicycle helmet with a 2-foot shotgun mic duct taped to the top.
Oh my god! That sounds like Ken. That sounds like Ken.
Yes, I would do that.
Yeah, that sounds like Ken. Yeah.
And he's got a coily cord from the microphone running down to a headphone amplifier in his belt. Another coily cord going up to headphones over the bicycle.
That's definitely Ken. That's absolutely Ken.
So, we had a table in the corner of the coffee house, and I'd say, Max, tell us about your hearing aid prototype. And then he faced me in the microphone and said,
that is nuts.
All I can picture is the guy from Revenge of the Nerds just screaming, "Nerds!"
Come on, that's absolutely.
By the way, the guy in Revenge of the Nerds is Bob Carradine. I went to high school with him. He's an excellent guitar player.
Wow.
Acoustic music.
Amazing.
And he's anything but a nerd. I feel sorry for the poor guy because he's not a nerd at all. That was the role that he could have got typecast.
Well, if you play guitar, that's how you got chicks. So.
Hey Roger, I got a weird question. Have you ever been at one of these Dead Presidents meetings and then, like, in your head you're like, damn it, I should have thought of that first? Like when you hear an idea that one of the other guys would say.
Every time I talk to you, Steve.
You're just like, oh yeah, me and Ken do that all the time. But I'm wondering if there was like something that somebody got to right before you, like came up with the idea, or maybe they kind of the idea was better on there, and you're like, man, I wish I would have done that.
Mostly in the Dead Presidents Society group, everybody was smarter than me, and so it was kind of a given that
awesome.
they come up with great ideas.
So humble. Yeah,
That's very encouraging.
Actually, it's true. These people like Dave Wessel, these guys are PhDs and they're innovators and they're creators too. And I approach things more from a musician who wanted to get things done. And I've made a lot of mistakes along the way and I needed help. But Don Buchla, for example, he was an extraordinary analog engineer. David Wessel, he had some of the papers he's written are just wonderful about ways to create sounds through examples and many different things. And Tom Oberheim, when I got into trouble in designing Linnstrom, Tom kindly came over and helped me out and told me what I was doing wrong. And so, I kind of dabble in a number of things, but I actually felt very privileged to be part of this group because these guys are all smarter in the field of engineering. I think I have a specialty in sort of taking the best of what I can find in engineering and combining it into an instrument.
You're a producer.
Actually, that's a good point. Yeah, I'm a producer. Yeah. I combine the technology and the music the best I can with the skills I have. And over the years, I've learned a lot, and I've written software. But for example, in this lunch group I have now in the South Silicon Valley area, these programs like James McCartney and Evan Brooks and Tim Thompson, these guys are way beyond me, and so they talk about things, and I just listen because it's hopefully I'm thinking some of them will rub off on me.
Yeah, wow. I know the feeling. Yep.
Wow, that's super encouraging just to hear, just that you guys have a community of ideas, and like us as a group here, we experience that on a daily because we all talk daily and we share.
And I think we're all better for it, too.
Yeah, we are.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Always grateful to be around other creative, brilliant minds.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I can't stress enough to people that, if you're locally not necessarily around people that you feel are uplifting you, you should really seek out a community that can uplift you in that way. Like if you feel like your ideas are being stifled in any way, you should seek out like-minded individuals that are pushing you forward, not holding you back, because that's really how humanity grows, And
that's exactly what happened with Corey the other day with his whole art process that he expounded upon us, told us detail by detail, gave us all that. But I want to segue into something. That you have a new drum machine coming. Can we nail down a release
I feel like you keep going back to that.
You keep going back to that.
I'll do better than that.
Nail down a release date?
Oh, wait. Hold on, Bryce.
I feel like we need a drum roll.
Bryce might be bearing fruit. So hold on.
Wait, what?
What is this?
See?
What did we just see?
Hold up. Don't ever come at me like that again, you guys. Don't ever come at me.
Oh man. Okay. So from what I saw from beyond was
I saw
some dopeness. I saw
two
dopeness.
main layers.
I saw dopeness.
Yeah,
I saw a
it
fader
was nuts.
layer
My
or-
brain is already exploding.
Dude, I'm already processing mentality of how to.
I'm already just trying to learn how to use it without it even being out. I'm
Exactly.
just like, oh man, this is
UI is
so
popping through the brain.
nuts.
So I want to ask this, Roger. Do we have an approximate release date or like a time frame?
Oh yeah.
Okay, go for it.
It will be released 4 years ago.
There it is, right there.
See, I told you, Roger is always in the future.
but see what? Oh my gosh!
It's like the Terminator drum machine coming back.
No, because the possibilities of something like that when it comes to things like physical modeling, when it comes to like. Yeah. Oh my gosh!
Don't start talking about physical modeling again. We're gonna go down that road again.
No, dude, it's because you know me. You know how much I desire to like duplicate a drum in synthesis.
Yes, I know. We're
like
both there. We're both there, but we've been told so many times.
It's hard. It's hard to do.
Let's capture this moment for a second. You just showed us what?
It's It's one of the prototypes of the drum machine I'm working
Do you
on.
regret showing us that already?
No, he does not regret showing us that, Ken.
No.
He does not. I'm speaking for Roger now. He doesn't regret showing us. Jeez, shut up, Ken.
Roger, we are ready. I'll just let you know the whole world is ready. If you have any doubts, I'm letting you know.
Hey,
Well, you know, in the ideal case, I would have a company and I'd have a lot of engineers and all that sort of stuff. But you know, at heart, I'm a musician.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really like having employees. When I had my first company, I had 55 employees, and that drove me nuts. And you know, when you've got that monthly nut that's so heavy, you got to pay everybody's salaries. They're supporting families. You don't have the chance to just take a break and do things at your own pace.
Yeah.
And yet, the best things I've done are when I had the freedom to create at my own pace. And so, I like the idea now of being able to keep my expenses very low and create at my own pace. It does take more time, but it makes me feel more like I'm a musician. I'm making an album, then I'm making another album, and I'm making another album. You know?
No, that's great. Just know that you have 4 beta testers here, just in case. You know, just ready to go, man.
Hey, Roger, I do want to bring up some conversational stuff about drum stuff, because that's who you are, and there's going to be a lot of people that want to know this stuff. So I do want to dig into it. What's your thoughts on PPQ and how tight resolution needs to be in general? Because one of the things about the Tempest that was interesting was that you drop back to 96 PPQ as opposed to going to like higher resolutions of 960 and that sort of thing. So my question to you about this is just what you're thinking on that, and you know, I don't want to get too specific about swing or anything, but just resolution in general.
That's right. In Tempest, it was 384th notes, so it was 96. My feeling is that it doesn't really matter, and because all the great recordings that you've heard of drum machines, with the exception of Jay Dilla, were made with quantized beats, and those are right on the money. And in fact, those are down to effectively like 24 parts per quarter note. Yeah. And as long as there's a tremendous amount of mythology about timing and shifting notes forward and backward and all that stuff. My feeling is that not only just from making drum machines and making beats and all that, but also my earlier work as a musician and listening to drummers play and all that stuff, is it's more important that the drummer play it the same way each bar or each phrase than to shift things around, because what happens is you adapt to it, you start to trust it. And so the other musicians, for example, the bass player is playing with the drummer, if he has to change his rhythm or his swing feel or something like that to match the drummer, because the drummer is speeding up or slowing down or changing the feel along, he can't trust it. But if it's in as long as he plays it the same way, if there is a groove there, it's most important that it be the same each time, which of course is easy for machines to do because they know exactly what to do. Absolutely. So my feeling is it's far more important to have subtle degrees of swing. And as long as you just line up your samples, trim the start of your samples, and your code is tight, so the sounds play exactly when they're supposed to play, I don't think all that matters. But then again, there's quite a debate about the Jay Dilla school. About how not using quantized and all that sort of stuff.
So as a drummer, there's a beauty of being locked in and also being unlocked at the same time.
For sure.
Yes.
The ability to your self resolution have control over that, right?
Yeah.
And when it came to like the MPCs and when it came to any sequencer that's out now, having the ability to turn quantize off is just beautiful. It's just beautiful. But I do believe that certain sequencers have to have a certain vibe. Like they have to have a certain vibe. Not every sequencer should sound the same, because then you should only just have one sequencer, because it's going to sound like every other sequencer. So like that whole Jay Dilla vibe, again, comes from something you said in the beginning. It's not necessarily the machine that sounds a certain way. It's
Mhm.
the programmer. It's the guy making the music behind it is what causes that vibe to happen, because they make decisions that point the machine in a certain way.
Well, yeah, it's interesting if you listen to some of Jay Dill's recordings. To my ears, they just sound like a bad drummer sometimes.
Yes.
But
Sure.
Jay Dilla had tremendous ideas, and there were these sounds coming in, and musical ideas that would come together. And I think when I hear people that copy Dilla's style, they're intending to make the beat to my ears sound like a bad drummer. It's not everything Jay Dilla did, but parts.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Wait,
agree with that, and I wanna also add-
Bad drummer is relative.
Yeah.
It's subjective.
It's
Depends
subjective.
on how drunk he is and what the gig is.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
subjective.
No,
because,
but let me clarify, because people are going to say, "What? He's dissing Jay Dilla?"
no, we know you're not.
I
But
know
I'm
exactly what you mean.
There was a certain timing in some of Jay Dilla's work that you could call ragged, but you listen to it, and everything works together, and it becomes a style.
Sure.
Kind of like what you were saying, Corey.
Pocket.
Is that if the music is good enough, then all the elements of that are associated with that goodness. And the truth is that anything can be called good or bad. It's all subjective.
Yeah.
And I think universally people appreciate Jay Dilla's contribution and his moving off the norm. So what I'm saying is not that I don't think his stuff sounds bad or empirically or objectively is bad timing, but rather when I first listened to it, I thought, well, some of that stuff sounds like a drummer who's not that great. But
Absolutely.
then again, you listen to it after a while, you get
definitely.
Yeah.
But I think even in that, there's expressions of music that you don't really hear in common 4/4 music or other things. There's when I talk about music, I like to talk about a sentence. So there's words in that sentence that haven't been able to be expressed in other genres, that when
Sure.
Dilla
That
and
makes sense.
D'Angelo came up with this vibe, certain feelings were able to, when the snare and the clap is behind the snare, it gives it a little bit more tension.
Yeah, it's just like when you're saying words, you're saying a sentence, there's sentiment there that you can pick up on the cues. But I think Questlove said it best. Like even he said, like when he first heard Dilla or D'Angelo, it may have been both. He said this about, but he heard the way they were kind of doing an offbeat drumming thing that he would have never thought to do, but he thought sounded good, and he was like, "Wait, are we allowed to do that?"
yeah. That was the exact same. It was like, are we?
let me check the music rules.
That's right. Exactly.
But I definitely hear what Roger's saying. There are some people that like push it purposely past that. I think Eloquent is a good example of that. Like some of his stuff is just pushed
That
too far.
inflection
Yeah.
is very purposeful, but at the same time, what I wonder is, have you ever been involved in like doing testing to try to figure out, okay, like I have a great session drummer, right? Somebody who's well practiced, and try to figure out what's their actual resolution? Have you ever tried to like just try to really determine like how accurate is accurate kind of thing?
Good question.
I've done some simple things, but I've never done an exhaustive study on it. For example, take someone's beat and turned into MIDI events and then measured the timing on all those. I took it more from the other way. I just said that I've got something here that feels right to my ears and to other people who did it. And I said, I think that works.
That's one of the things that I always kind of like. We talked about Dave earlier and Rossum, and that's one of the things that I always kind of spoke to me is whenever I've talked to him about like circuit design and his sample chips and that sort of thing, is that he always spoke from a musical perspective of, well, I want to drop out bits and I want to drop out information that doesn't matter relative to actual music, actual musicality. So if you would compare his samplers and his the sonic character of a lot of his things, they would sound different at the same 12-bit as other things. Now, granted, 12-bit to me is more noise floor and that sort of thing, but like the tone of his samplers would have this certain musical character versus someone who would just look at it and say, okay, this is how many parameters I have, I'm going to put it flat across the board. When you take a musician, such as like yourself, because you are a musician, and you apply musician ideals to designing something, you get a little bit skewed relationship there.
Well, it's true. I think one of the problems bigger companies have is that they've got the marketing department and they've got the engineering department, and then the communication between them is horrible because they pretty much speak different languages anyway.
Yeah.
And I often found
Amen.
that in early, Japanese products from sort of the Yamahas and the Rolands is that marketing could come up with a list of features and engineering just put a button for each one. It didn't make any sense, and they would take them 3 or 4 iterations to get it right. But it's that's one of the things that's nice about having it in one head is that in the worst case I just have an internal conflict, but otherwise the communication works pretty well. Better if that answered the question.
No, that
Totally.
that was clear for me.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I appreciate that information, and I think we are coming up on our time here. 'Cause
Yeah.
we've been going long, but listen, I do want to say, Roger, thank you so much for coming on.
This was
Thank you so
incredible.
much.
This
Yeah.
was amazing.
Well, and before we go, I want to be sure that so Roger, we talked about, firstly, thank you for all the great history, great anecdotes and stories, and sharing the prototype for the new drum machine with us. And what's the future hold for Roger Linn Designs?
Yes, please.
Well, I'm really excited about Linnstrom, and it seems to be this wonderful little box that finds interesting and smart and creative people all over the world, and it's really nice. It's created a community. Our forum has some of the brightest and most creative people on it, and it's really a lot of fun. And it seems to attract people who not only see it for what it is, but what it can be, because all the software for it is open source. So anyone can customize it to do.
That's a slight question that I have to ask you about the Linnstrom. So you have a smaller version of the Linnstrom that's a little bit more affordable now for the guys like me who are struggling artists. So I have a question about that. If I get 2 Linnstroments, can you use them in tandem?
Well, they both have MIDI output, so you can mix that into your DAW, I suppose. But actually, I don't think you need to have 2. I think the large one is fine for 2-handed play, so it's not that bad.
Well, the reason why I bring that up is more like I buy one now because I can afford a small one now. I buy a small one later, and that sort of thing.
Well, the differences are 128 keys versus 200 keys, right?
Sure.
Is that basically just the difference?
Yeah, and basically underneath that surface, it's a continuous sensing surface. It's just that on top is this molded silicon rubber surface that delineates the positions into specific notepads.
Yeah,
and that's why you can do this.
I'm getting one. I gotta figure it out. I gotta figure out how to get one.
Yeah, now that just makes me want 2 things: the Linnstrom and the Tempest, which Tempest is already. So this has been good and bad for the pockets. So
hey Roger, I want to bring something up, and I'm gonna bring this up in a way that kind of puts you a little bit on the spot, because that's like, I like to get punched in the face, so I'll be that guy. So we had a question in the chat earlier about, hey, we've had some really great guests, and we have, both between this show and the Synth Summit show, we've had some really wonderful legends on the air. Would you ever be open to doing like a group chat like this, where we bring on like Tom, Dave, Dave Rossum, all the Daves? There's so many Daves.
the Dead Presidents Society.
But no, like just bringing on a few of you guys and just kind of having a chat, because I think that would be a wonderful thing to see how you guys, kind of coerce in that way.
Sure. Sounds good to me. In fact, if you got 9 of us together, we could play Hollywood Squares.
That's right. That's right. And listen, I'm winning every time. Just so
no, you're not.
You're losing as long as you keep hitting that desk with that spring on that microphone stand.
By the next show, I'll have a new mic stand, just so that everybody knows.
Hey Ken, just hook up a contact mic to your stand and use it as a gate.
Yeah.
Listen, you think I won't?
Well, Roger, thank you so much for your time.
Exactly.
So
Thank you, Roger. We appreciate you.
Can I play you out?
Sure.
Yes. Absolutely.
Please do.
Okay. I always was a fan of blues harmonica players like Norton Buffalo. So here's an instrument blues harmonica.
Wow.
Thank you
Roger,
so
wait.
Oh.
No. What instrument were you playing? Where was that harmonica?
Oh, that's actually I have a free downloadable sounds file for Apple's Logic or MainStage, and it's on my site under the Getting Started page. And all that is an FM synthesizer running through a guitar amp model with a little reverb on it.
Wow.
But the thing is, you've got 3 dimensions of control. I've got pressure, I've got pitch,
Man.
and I've got timbre in the y-axis. So you put all those together, and it has a very expressive sound.
Yo,
Absolutely.
I've never wanted to be a harmonica playing hillbilly until right now.
I actually have wanted to be that for a long time, but you know, I've got issues with my DNA that it's like if I go down that path, I might not come back.
Yeah,
so.
Ken, don't do that, Ken.
Don't do it.
That was
Ken.
great.
Well, cool. We're gonna call it one. Again, thank you, Roger Linn, and
so
thanks to the
much.
whole panel and my crew for making this a great interview. And for those of you that are watching, come back next week because we'll be talking to Dave Rossum and Marco Alpert of Rossum Electro and formerly of Emu Systems. And
Yes.
Ask Marco about this quote from him.
okay,
He once said to me, "If it weren't for NAMM shows, companies would never finish products."
ah,
Oh, snap. Yeah.
If it weren't for NAMM shows, companies might never announce products early.
that's classic.
Yeah.
All right.
Anyway, it's been great. Corey, thank you very much for inviting me onto your show. And thanks all, and goodbye now.
Thanks for
Thank you
coming.
so much.
Take
Hey,
care,
don't
Roger.
end your call. Don't end your call yet. We're gonna end the broadcast first.